Now it's starting. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jaishree Chouhan. I am a senior research fellow in the Department of English, University of Rajasthan. And I welcome you to the TMYS Review Project Series, Working Women. TMYS Review December 2025 will explore the theme of working women in literature. We are calling for the submission of essays, poems, interviews, short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. This evening, I consider myself very privileged and honored to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Dr. Sukrita Kumar, K. Priyamvada ma'am, and Rasana Atreya ma'am. Who will shortly share their views and insights with us. The topic for today's discussion is women professionals in publishing industry navigating the digital transformation, where we will try to understand how women professionals in publishing industry, where they are authors, editors, anthologists, are adapting to the challenges and opportunities by the new media transcending in their working fields in terms of their social cultural stations and professional positionings. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our guest speakers for today. This is a formal introduction of everyone. Our first speaker for the session is Dr. Sukrita Kumar. Dr. Sukrita, a poet, critic, and artist born in Kenya, has published numerous poetry collections, translations, critical works. Her latest poetry books include Yellow Salt and Pepper and Vanishing Woods. She was an invited poet at the International Writing Program USA and served as poet in residence in Hong Kong. A former fellow at IIAS Shimla, she has received multiple fellowships and residencies. Dr. Sukrita held the Aruna Asaf Ali Chair at the University of Delhi. Currently, she is a guest editor of Indian Literature and co-editor of Writing in Context series, Routledge, UK. In 2023, she received the Rabindranath Tagore Award for Literature. We are truly honored and delighted to have you with us, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now I'll move to the next introduction. Ms. K. Priyamvada. Ms. Priyamvada is an editor, author with 25 years of experience, more than 25 years of experience in print, online publishing. She is the author of Animal Antiques, More Animal Antiques, Gravipus Maximus and Magic Mirror, 0 to 10, All Are My Friends, Fireflies and Other Poems. She won the BBC Quiz Mastermind India 2000 and has been a KBC guest expert, which is very interesting. She's deputy editor at India International Center, New Delhi. Welcome board, ma'am, and it is absolute privilege to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here and in the presence of such esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And the next session, the next panelist for the session is none other than author and novelist Ms. Rasana Atreya. Rasana Atreya is a genre-defying novelist and former engineer whose stories spotlight bold South Asian women defying social norms. Author of 4 acclaimed novels, she brings grit, grace, and touch of rebellion in her characters. From Kickstarter to Shopify, Sana builds her author business and with techie's curiosity and a storyteller's heart. Based in California, she sips ginger tea at sunrise and champions women finding and using their voices. We can see that. So we are truly excited to have you among here, ma'am. Looking forward to have an engaging and insightful session with you.
Thank you for having me.
We will now open the forum for discussion. Without further delay, I would request now Sukrita ma'am first to you. Please share your views with us.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's a privilege to be here amongst you all, and just reflecting on some of the key points that come to my mind in the context of the subject of discussion today. I do not know from where to start because I think, as far as I'm concerned, I have been in literature all my life, reading, writing, breathing literature, publishing, and publishing for a cause. I asked myself, why did I get into publishing my own poetry or writing or translations? And a very simple answer is that this is not something which can, writing is not something which is entirely private unless one does write a diary, but this is more than diary. Literature is not diary writing only, though, of course, the personal gets into it, but the personal, as the well known saying goes, in as far as T.S. Eliot is concerned, the personal becomes an impersonal emotion when it becomes a poem. So it's something like that. And once you get the feeling that yes, it's ready to go out there, then you want to publish it, because poetry or writing is not just meant to be expression, it's also got to be communication. And communication can happen with the other only when it's out there in the public, not necessarily people who are friends or relatives or whatever, but the impersonal you somewhere. And it's not as if when one is writing, it's not as if you think about that impersonal you or the reader. One doesn't consciously think about that. But as you get into the process of writing, it slowly begins to address the other being within yourself, which is a little more objective. And within that becomes a certain kind of, within that is contained a collective readership, and that collectivity is what is the group of readers of our work. It may be diverse, it may be readers who like your work or do not like your work. But in any case, the compulsion or the compelling nature of the experience to express is always there. And that is why one writes. It's compelling. You do want to write. It's not as if anybody's got a, gun on your shoulder or on your whatever. It's not at gunpoint that you write. The compelling nature of writing is from within, and it is a matter of both agony as well as joy. And agony because one has to agonize with the process. Sometimes you don't get the right words, the medium you need to have a full control of, or as full as it can be. It can never be perfect, but the try, you're always kind of feeling that you are on trial, that words are challenging. Oh, can you use me? Or are you going to abuse me? So that point has always been within me. Now, one reason why, if I want to specify it very clearly, I mean, this was only in the context of publishing that I said whatever I did, but in the context of writing, I think there has always been a desire somewhere for a certain kind of, call it self realization, or going to a truth which is otherwise not very clearly visible to the eye. One has to open the inner eye, as it were. Somewhere it has to become insightful. Somewhere sight is not enough. It's the insight that you require, which is going to go into examining, maybe, or more than examining, is exploring some experience that you may have had, or the possibility of an experience that comes up in one's mind, and the potential that it has for meaning. So, what are you trying to do through that? It's also self realization. You want to know your own self a little more. And I think your own writing defines you somewhat. The reflection of your being is there, but the being is not with a small b, not in lowercase. That being has to grow into becoming a collective being. So then that B capital comes up. And for that, the process is sometimes very excruciating, very agonizing. But one is willing to take that on because you know that you are after some kind of a truth. There is a small ray of light at the end of the tunnel, but you have to get into the tunnel to get into that, opening at the other end, which is very frightening. So it also has some kind of a sense of adventure about it. So if you're wanting to, as we are speaking in a forum which says, tell me your story. So in this case, the story has, first of all, to be somewhere told to yourself. And that self has to be identified from within. So that is the process that you get into. It is like getting into absolute darkness, and then slowly that ray of light comes up, and then you start following it. And you never know whether you're going to come out or not out of that tunnel. So sometimes you feel that you have come out, if only to get back again into a larger tunnel. So it's a continuous process, always from one kind of darkness to light to darkness to light. And I don't think, yes, perhaps there is somewhere some kind of a process of evolving happens, evolving in the context of the tool that one has, the tool of words. You begin to understand the personality of metaphor, the identity of simile, the identity of a word per se. And that exploration is very exciting and sometimes very frustrating. So that's why when you sometimes say, oh, I've got a writer's block, what does that mean? People laugh sometimes about it. But it is when everything gets jammed, when the tires don't move at all, the wheels are just stuck at a point. And suddenly, when it happens that you sort of begin to take off, that is very, very exciting. You start writing, and then again, a moment may come either of illumination and absolute perfect ecstasy of having explored and found something as an expression that you're looking for, or at times you are stuck further into the mire, not knowing which way to go. No matter what it starts with a sense of wonder. The trigger may be what we call inspiration, and that inspiration may be lying in the twinkle of the brat's eye on the road, or it could be something like a larger reality of a riot going on in your city or neighborhood or whatever. So it anything that could serve as what we use in conventional terms, the word touch you, or something that moves you, something that can shake you out of yourself. And that somewhere the transcendence happens then of a consciousness, and you go on to the realm of creativity. And when you are in that realm, you don't know where yourself is. So at the end, when you finish a product, a poem or whatever, then it's like you say, hooray, did I write this? And you wonder about it again. And then you may even have to cancel it all out. But the moment that notion of finality emerges in your own mind, that is a point of a kind of very, I would say, a triumph, somewhere a kind of a triumph. And that is what we are surviving on. I am surviving on all my life doing these things. It could be through translation, it could be through writing a poem, it could be through editing a volume where all the collectivity of people who are readers and writers come together and do some work. So it's a variety of things that I have been doing, but not all to do with just words, but it has a lot to do with also painting, which I do indulge in. So I do paint and I do write and I do, translate, and I do edit volumes. I am editing right now the journal called Indian Literature in Sahitya Academy. So there are all these activities which revolve around the idea of creative expression. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. You did kind of an present an autopsy kind of a thing in front of us. The whole process of it, and it was beautiful, beautiful to see just a glimpse of the process that runs into you, and how a final product, the aesthetic product, is out open in front of us readers. So thank you, ma'am, for sharing these initial views. And now, without any further ado, I would come back to you, ma'am. With we have questions, a lot of questions, though I could manage just 3 or 4 questions for you because of the time constraint, but I'll definitely come back to you now. I'll move to our next speaker, Priyamvada ma'am. Please share your views with us.
Thank you. And thank you, Sukrita ma'am, for that lovely description of the whole creative process and what impels us to write, the urge that comes from within. I totally agree. Since the topic for today was given as, the digital transformation, so I've sort of focused more on that in my initial presentation. And then I thought the questions would deal more with creativity and so forth, which you shared with us, right? So I have a little write-up on the transition that we're all living through and in some cases struggling to cope with. Okay. So the publishing industry as we know it is undergoing a seismic shift. Right? Many of us who are editors and writers will remember days when we were editing with pen on paper in hard copy, but those days are like long gone now. Right? The transformation driven by the convergence of technology, consumer behavior, and market dynamics has redefined how content is created, distributed, and consumed. Digital transformation in the context of publishing, I believe, is not merely the act of converting physical books into digital formats. It is the complete reimagining of the publishing value chain from editorial processes and printing to marketing, distribution, and reader engagement using digital platforms, tools, and of course, data. If we look at statistics of the Indian publishing industry, it appears India is the sixth largest publishing industry in the world, which I think is a good sign. It shows there's a healthy reading culture in India where people talk of readership declining, but clearly there are plenty of people reading in India, which is good for all of us who work in the publishing industry. India is also apparently the second largest in terms of English language publishing. Of course, a lot of this is textbook and educational publishing, but that's a huge number when we think of it worldwide. And apparently, there are more English language speakers in India, around 129 million, than in the UK, which is around 68 million, which is quite an interesting statistic as well. So we have about double the number of English speakers here in India, or people who understand and can write it. Have varying levels of proficiency, and this is also one of the reasons why there's so much publishing outsourcing that happens to India from both the UK and US publishing industries. That is one of the growing industries in India in the IT services space and publishing outsourcing. With over 21,000 publishers and a market valued at more than 500 billion, India's publishing sector is both vast and varied. Right? We have all the large multinational English language publishers, the scientific and technical publishers. We have small regional language publishers that are promoting and preserving India's many large and small languages. And here again, I'd like to mention Ma'am as editor of Indian literature, which does so much to preserve India's own languages from the far-flung corners of the country. According to a Nielsen report commissioned by the Federation of Indian Publishers, India publishes over 9,000 titles annually across its major languages. And over the last decade, this ecosystem has witnessed an accelerated migration from traditional print to digital formats. The e-book market in India, though relatively small compared to print, is growing steadily. And the pandemic was one of the reasons for a rapid transition as well, as a lot of learning and e-learning moved onto digital formats rather than this normal classroom pattern. The e-book segment is expected to reach 12 billion by 2025, according to Statista. Much of this growth is driven by the increasing use of smartphones, affordable data, and rising digital literacy. Platforms like Amazon Kindle, Google Play Books, and Kobo have made it easier than ever for Indian readers to access books on the go. Interestingly, Indian language publishing online is also a significantly growing area. Indian platforms like Pratilipi, Jagannath, and Mathrubharati have tapped into regional content, democratizing access to literature in India's own local languages. Another important trend is the surge in audiobooks and podcasts. According to a recent survey, India's audiobook segment is growing at 34% annually, fueled by platforms like Audible and Storytel, catering to busy urban readers who prefer listening to reading. You may not have time to read a book during your busy workday, but while you're traveling, let's say if you're using public transport, you can always plug in your earphones and listen to a podcast or listen to a book. So that's another growing area. Digital transformation has also reshaped authorship and access. Traditionally, aspiring authors had to navigate a long and sometimes challenging path to publication. But today, platforms like Kindle Direct Publishing enable many writers to become published authors. We have one amongst us, Ms. Atreya. According to KDP India, thousands of Indian authors have published their works digitally, and many have earned a steady income, something that would have been unthinkable a couple of decades ago. So from content curation to printing, digital tools are now embedded in every step of the publishing process. In fact, even as editors, collaborative workflows have come in where editors, proofreaders, and designers can work remotely and in real time. The other elephant in the room, of course, is AI. where AI and machine learning are increasingly being used for content recommendation, plagiarism detection, and even predictive analytics to forecast reader preferences. On the other side, which is production and printing, print on demand technology has revolutionized inventory management. Right? You no longer need to print a large stock and store it in a warehouse, which is also an expensive proposition. You can print even an individual title, one copy at a time, on demand. So no longer do publishers need to worry about overprinting or warehousing. Titles can be printed and shipped as orders come in, reducing waste and cost. However, the path to digital transformation is not without obstacles. While urban India is embracing digital reading, rural and underprivileged populations still face challenges of access, affordability, and digital literacy. Now, this is a sort of, there are two sides to this picture. One is you may not have access to get online. The other is if you have access, then you can, sort of listen into a classroom anywhere in the world, which is why e-learning has also boomed across India. An early example was Khan Academy, which started teaching math lessons to students through simple videos. Now it says it has over 10,000 lessons on its platform. The other big challenge with digital conversion, of course, is piracy and copyright infringement. So many publishers struggle. You bring out a printed book, before you know it, there's a PDF floating around online and people are sharing it. So that's going to severely impact your revenue because people aren't going to buy the book when you can freely download it online. Here, I'd also like to mention the role of government and policy support. Recognizing the importance of digital content, the National Digital Library of India provides access to over 50 million digital resources, including books, journals, and lectures in multiple languages. The government has also started initiatives like Digital India and eBasta, supported by the Ministry of Education, which aim to digitize textbooks and make them accessible to students throughout the nation. Here, India also has a unique challenge because we have so many languages in our country. The government, again, through its initiatives, provides ways of preserving some of these languages and also manuscripts that are scattered across museums and repositories. I'd like to mention two initiatives here. One is, in fact, associated with the institution where I work, the India International Center. The initiative is sponsored by the Ministry of External Affairs and it is called Samhita. So there is a Samhita online portal where manuscripts from India, which have traveled across the world, right? Manuscripts have gone to Central Asia, spread across Asia. Then after the 18th century, when India was colonized, manuscripts have been taken away and are stored in museums abroad, in England, in France, in other countries. So the effort now is to access these manuscripts, to digitize them, and to preserve them on a digital portal so that researchers across India can access them as well, or researchers anywhere in the world. And so the Samhita portal is the first attempt to bring together repositories from outside India and South Asia on the same platform. In the context of languages, there is a scheme for protection and preservation of endangered languages, where dictionaries and grammars of endangered languages are being created, and also now language learning apps. So, as an example, one of the languages spoken in a far corner of India, in the Nicobar Islands, is a language called Sanenyo. There are very few speakers left now of the language. Recently, based on research and fieldwork, a Sanenyo language app has been developed. Now, this helps the younger generation of the community learn and access the language. Right? How are the words pronounced? What are the specific meanings of the words? What does this inflection suggest, etc.? And it's also accessible for researchers. So it's a really sort of beautiful coming together of technology in order to preserve something that's very valuable in our culture and to ensure it doesn't vanish. India has 22 official languages. Apparently, there are 121 languages that are spoken by more than 10,000 people. A speech community of 10,000 people, there are 121 languages. And if we count all the dialects of India, there are more than 19,500 languages and dialects in our amazingly diverse nation. And that is an amazing diversity that we should celebrate. So, just to wrap up, The digital transformation of publishing in India is not just about creating or adapting to change, it is about shaping the future of how knowledge is created, shared, and consumed. As authors, as readers, as technology adapters, as publishers, we must embrace innovation while holding on to the values of plurality, accessibility, and creativity. Let us use technology not just to disrupt, but to democratize access to information and knowledge, not just to replicate print, but to unrestrict our imagination. And not just to increase market share, but to ignite the creativity and imagination of the young minds of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for this amazing insight into the opportunities and the emerging areas as well, and what can be is being doing and what can be done further as well. Amazingly shared, ma'am. Thank you so much. And I would rapidly move to our next speaker, Rasana Atreya, ma'am. Please, over to you, ma'am.
Good evening to all of you, and good morning to my ginger tea because I'm in California and it's still negotiating with my brain. I'm honored to be among such accomplished women. Once upon a time, I managed server crashes for NASA and the United States Army. My job was to keep high performance systems up and running. Today, I tell stories about women in India who are also trying to hold their worlds together. Somewhere between those two identities, engineer and storyteller, I raised children, questioned patriarchy, and figured out that the strongest signals don't always come from the loudest voices. I'm Rasana Atreya, novelist, former techie, and mother to two children and five books. One of those books was written at the invitation of an American crime fiction author, which just goes to show never underestimate an Indian auntie with a story idea and a solid internet connection. I'm here today to talk about how digital technology didn't just help me return to work, it helped me reinvent what work even looks like. We moved back to India for a few years, and that's when my writing journey truly began. With two very young children at home, I couldn't exactly be on call if a server went down at 2 a.m. unless someone was offering childcare and ginger tea in exchange. So instead, I turned to writing. My novel began as a reaction to something I kept hearing over and over again. What happened to you? How come you become so black? In a country where matrimonial ads still ask for fair brides, this kind of casual color commentary is practically a greeting. It's right up there with what's your pay package and when are you getting married? The holy trinity of Indian small talk. The irony, both my father and father in law were very light skinned, but I grew up with a dark skinned mother. Later, I married into a family with a mother in law whose complexion mirrored my mother's. So, when I returned to India after living in the US, I was stunned at how colorism was not only alive, it was thriving. Offended on behalf of these two very strong women, my mother and my mother in law, I began writing. At first, I thought it would be a short story, but the story insisted on growing. It needed space, breadth, and depth. And so I kept writing until finally a novel emerged. That unpublished manuscript was shortlisted for a minor British literary prize. Around that time, I was offered a traditional publishing contract by none other than Urvashi Butalia. Saying no wasn't easy. Had I accepted, she would have been my publisher. I mean, that's the kind of story that looks great on tote bags at literary festivals. Then I wrote about the experience, but self publishing was still new in India then and quite technical. As someone with a tech background, I saw it as a challenge. So I declined the offer, rolled up my sleeves, and self published. Then I wrote about the experience for the Hindu. That article caught the attention of newspapers across the country. Some even sent photographers to my home for full fledged photo shoots. I discovered that writing a novel is far easier than figuring out what to do with your hands in a photo. And when Amazon launched the Kindle in India, they flew me to New Delhi to be part of the official launch. In the years that followed, I mentored countless other writers, helping them navigate the world of self-publishing. Because once you find your voice, you can't help but help others find theirs too. I built my own website. I set up email sequences with MailerLite. I integrated Shopify. Now I'm preparing a Kickstarter campaign to fund special hardcover editions of my books. Not because it was easy, but because no one else was going to do it for me. And let's be honest, if you have ever tried changing fonts in MailerLite without sobbing, you've earned your digital badge of honor. The truth is, I never really left technology. I just kept it on a part-time basis. I took on tech contracts now and then to keep my skills sharp. And once we moved back to California, I volunteered every other year at MIT Tech Reviews conference in San Francisco. It was the perfect excuse to sit in on cutting edge sessions and pretend I understood quantum computing long enough to ask intelligent sounding questions. But what pulled me more deeply was storytelling, especially stories about Indian women who quietly but firmly push back against the expectations placed on them. Women who didn't always see themselves in the books they grew up reading. Women who didn't always have the words but knew they had something to say. Let me share one more story that perfectly captures the intersection of digital technology and personal voice. A while ago, hired a professional narrator to record one of my audiobooks. She was amazing. Her enunciation, her pacing, everything was technically perfect. But my readers didn't connect with it. And after a while, I realized why. It wasn't my voice. It didn't have the pauses, the inflections, the rhythms that coming from living the story, from knowing the weight of what is being said and what isn't. That's when I turned to voice cloning AI. Now I'm working on narrating my books in my own voice, digitally cloned, but still unmistakably mine, because technology shouldn't erase your voice, it should help you reclaim it. That's one of the biggest opportunities digital tools offer women in publishing, especially women of Indian origin. They give us access to platforms that weren't built for us but can now be used by us to bypass gatekeepers, to reach readers directly, to tell our own stories in our own way. But let's be honest, digital technology can be intimidating, especially for women returning to the workforce after a break, or for those of us who were told growing up that technology was someone else's domain. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering, and still, when I re-entered the professional world, I hesitated. I second guessed myself when setting up automated funnels. I watched YouTube videos at midnight to reacquaint myself at DNS propagation. At one point, I thought I'd broken the internet, but luckily it was just a browser cache issue. Not because I couldn't learn it, but because I'd spent years away from it. And like many women, I had been conditioned to think that unless we are experts, we shouldn't even try. That, to me, is one of the biggest challenges in the space. Not the technology itself, but the confidence gap that keeps women from using it. In academic publishing, especially, this plays out in very specific ways. Women may hesitate to submit to open access journals, or struggle to promote their work online, or feel overwhelmed by the fast pace of digital platforms. Meanwhile, the algorithms keep rewarding the loudest voices, often not ours. And yet, I've seen how transformative digital tools can be when women embrace them. I've sold books to readers across the world, from Hyderabad to Houston, without a traditional publisher. I've reached Indian women in small towns who tell me, I didn't know anyone else felt this way. That, to me, is the power of digital publishing. It's not just reach, it's resonance. For women of Indian origin, the cultural context adds another layer. Many of us are juggling caregiver roles, navigating identity in multiple languages, trying to explain why our stories matter, even when they don't fit Western or mainstream Indian publishing molds. Digital tools help us navigate those spaces. They allow us to self publish in regional languages, to crowdfund passion projects, to connect directly with niche audiences who do care. But we need to make these tools more accessible through mentorship, inclusive design, and community support. Because not every woman has the time, training, or tech background to dive in alone. We also need to challenge the perfectionism that holds so many of us back. You don't have to be an expert in AI to benefit from it. You don't have to be a coder to set up an email list. You just have to be willing to learn and to forgive yourself when you get it wrong the first time, or the second, or the eighth. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you cannot separate voice from technology. In today's publishing world, the two are intertwined. The tools that you use shape how and whether your voice is heard. So my message to women in academic publishing and to storytellers everywhere is this: use the tools even when they scare you. Ask those silly questions even when you feel behind, and most of all, keep telling your stories, because in the end it's not about the tech, it's about the story, and about making sure that your story doesn't stay silent. Thank you.
Yeah, it should be a clap worthy. Thank you, ma'am. It was it for me. It was, and for our audience viewers as well. It appeared as a strong calling, a strong narrative, as in a calling that a person with a story, a woman with a story, and with technology, what can she not do? So it was a perfect calling for us as well. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your views with us. It was wonderful. So now, with your permissions, I would move to the question answer session. And my first question will be to Sukrita ma'am. Ma'am, with your permission, should I?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
Ji. Sukrita ji, your entire life has been devoted to literature, performing many roles as an author, a poet, a literary critic, an anthologist, and a scholar of Indian literature. First, we would like to ask you about historicity of Indian literature as a genre in academics, especially referring to your work, especially culture diversity, linguistic plurality, and literary traditions of India, women's studies in India, contours of change. How do you assess the journey of this genre from marginalized to mainstream of literary studies in India? And what, according to you, are the factors which are incentivizing this development?
Well. So, yeah, I think it's a very valid question to be asking me, because throughout my journey as whatever you say in terms of poet, being a poet, a scholar, a translator, and all those things, I mean, initially it was a very conventional. See, I was brought up in Kenya. I was born and brought up in Kenya. Now, why do I feel the need to say that? Because when we shifted to India, I was already 15 years of age, which also meant that a certain kind of trajectory in education had already been setting in the context of what I was going to do in literature. And so I went on to do my various degrees right up to PhD in English literature and in American literature. So it was at that point of time, my shifting from Kenya, a British colony, more British than the British kind of colony, and from there to India, was a kind of a cultural and geographical and climatically a shocking kind of a change. And in order to take that all in and to develop my new sense of being, I understood at some level that I needed to really work with Indian literature. But my English department, wherever I was, whether in the north or in the south, would not permit me to work in Hindi and Urdu and other languages, which I had developed on my own, Punjabi, because in Kenya I didn't have a chance to do that. So I'd worked hard to get these languages out here in India. And when I started wanting to work on it, I was not being given leave as a teacher of English literature. I was, very frustrated, because then I realized that what we really needed to do was to somewhere get to know what India is all about, first and foremost. And what hit upon my mind was that it is really the complex cultural, kind of canvas that is in front of me in terms of what is India. So because if you were to think in terms of languages, as just mentioned by, I think, Priyamvada, who talked about the number of languages that we have in this country, and I would not venture to say the dialects are dialects. That's a very controversial point. I mean, those dialects are really full-fledged, most of the times, they are languages. So if you add on to all that, and I got involved in a whole venture called PLSI. I don't know if you're familiar with this, G. N. Davies, a whole project of People's Linguistic Survey of India. And I got involved with that primarily because I was trying to explore what India is all about. And every language is a carrier of a culture. So on the one hand, all these languages, and I don't believe in small language, big language. A language is unto itself autonomously a very powerful kind of indicator of what your identity is, what your culture is. And so, my aim was to try to understand what the linguistic plurality is, which is part of, by the way, the title of that book that I did eventually. So linguistic plurality comes into it, and cultural diversity therefore comes into it, because each language carries its culture, as I was saying. And so how do I see this? How do I examine it? Through the literary traditions of India, because that's where you would see all these languages which have a long history in terms of what literature was produced. Look at Sangam, Sangam literature, Tamil. And what about, everywhere that you see, whether it's Punjabi or down south there in Malayalam or any language, there is a long literary history to each language. So it is like bountiful, the prosperity of linguistic, languages and literatures in the country. So how did I venture to get into it? First of all, I realized that there was a need to somewhere, for all of us, including myself at that time, to decolonize one's mind. And one of the main people who really had a great impact on me was Ngugi wa Thiong'o, writing in Kenya, which was my country. So in Kenya, he used to write, and then he took exile and came to California, where he actually invited me to come over to his center in California, where he was doing, writing and thinking and actually doing translations. And I got into the idea of translation at that time, because all these languages that you had in your own country, the complexity of the scene, how do you try to understand it? Only through translated literature, only through making an attempt to translate from one language to another language and see the network of cultures, the way it operates. But how do you see that? Not only through written literatures, but also through oral traditions. So if you were to look at all that at a glimpse, what will you see? A whole complex structure of cultures, right? And within there, a network of how one connects with the other. So they are disparate on the one hand, on the other, it's with lots of differences, but on the other hand, they would also connect with each other. What are the connecting features? The epics we know, first and foremost, whether it is Mahabharata or it is, Ramayana, many such small epics also, which reflect the, kind of vision of, say, Ram and Lakshman and Sita going into the forest, for instance. So there is Babuji Ki Khat, Pad in Rajasthan. There also you see a travel and so on. And then within that travel, you see certain kind of a mapping of cultures, the way it happens. So it was at a very early stage that I began to see all that, when our English departments were totally colonized. We had only British literature or at the most American literature, right? So, and I know that when I got this fellowship at Indian Institute of Advanced Study to do my book on modernism, which I wanted to do and work out what was the indigenous concept of modernism. And if I wanted to do that, then obviously I would want leave, isn't it? But when the leave was not granted to me till I said, all right, don't give me any salary. And fortunately, I got the fellowship at the institute, Shimla. So I went there and I did this project and came back with 3 books long ago. I'm talking about 20 years ago when I did that, or 25 years ago. At that time, there was no adequate market for it. There was no understanding of English department people as to how they could contain these other language literatures. So for me, it was a struggle, a battle. And then I needed to create a book like the one that you mentioned, cultural diversity, linguistic plurality through literatures of India. So this was done particularly keeping in mind that, and there was, by the way, a lot of opposition of English teachers at that time. Now it is supposed to be a favorite book for them, but at that time there was a lot of opposition to it. Why? Because English teachers said, how are we going to teach Sufi or Bhakti or Hindi, Urdu, stuff? Where do we get that knowledge from? So I brought it to the text, also certain kinds of guiding points which I mentioned as to how to read these literatures and how do you transmit all of that. I could give a whole lecture on it, but I think I need to cut short and come to the point that, this is how I came to cultural diversity scene, and with one aim in mind. Why do we want to understand cultural diversity? Because if we understand it, only then will we respect the difference. Only after understanding would we be able to contain the other, understand the other. And so therefore, knowing that cultural diversity exists, we cannot therefore have animosities between two cultures, like Konkani is mine or Marathi is mine. Like you see these voices coming up even today, when language issues come up, because it's a very, very emotive issue. So we have to, through academics, develop ways of understanding differences in our own country, cultural differences, and then learn to respect them and learn to, live together differently. We can live differently, but at least respect each other and have that cordiality. So that was my reason. Also, today, for instance, if I'm doing, you'll be happy to know that today, when I'm doing Indian literature, I am at that time editing this journal. I am bringing some of my understanding to my vision of an editor. And what am I doing right now? We are putting together oral traditions from different parts of the country. So we learn to know that that is serious matter. We need to understand our oral traditions, And from these traditions, modernity also has evolved. It hasn't come from above, So all this is a fairly long answer to your long enough question.
It's a worthy answer, ma'am. You answer all the queries that we had, and thank you, ma'am, for the early efforts and the current efforts that you're doing. And these efforts should be there, and especially what you said for all old traditions. There, we in Rajasthan, there's a long struggle of to get identified this language as an official language in Indian Constitution
Yes.
as well. It's a long struggle. So,
Yeah.
and beautiful old tradition that should be documented and should be accounted for. And so, I hope we take inspirations from you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, I'll move to the next question to Ms. Priyamvada. Priyamvada, ma'am, about your active career span as an editor and prominently a poet. First, this was very my personal curiosity. I want to ask you about your musing thoughts and the entire vision behind such vivid creativity, where you effortlessly write for adults on feminine identity, social rules, loss, love in the same breath. You write for children with same evocative faculty, and to mention being a successful editor as well, where critical insight is of utmost importance. How each role affects the other, how this dynamic relation works. Please tell us.
Thank you for a very intriguing question. And I think the roles sort of feed into each other and are so deeply intertwined with each other that it's difficult to separate one from the other. When it comes to writing poetry, and this is something Sukrita ma'am also talked about, creativity can be inspired by a moment, an emotion, a sight of something that touches the heart or the mind. Right? You may be traveling to work and you see something that strikes you, or you may be busy with work and suddenly one line will pop into your head and you have to sort of scribble it down, and then later on, in a moment of quiet recollection, you can sit and work on it, and then an entire poem will emerge. When one writes for an adult audience, one also draws on one's personal experience as an Indian woman. And I find it fascinating that Ms. Atreya has talked about this, in her transnational journey as well. The specific challenges and situations we face, I think, give us certain life experiences that then we may want to express in poetry. And this may span a whole gamut of emotions like love, loss, joy, etc. When one is writing for children, and there are 4 books that I've written there, I think that's a much more joyful experience because there's a sheer wonder of learning. And some of my books are like fun science books for kids about animals and birds and so forth. And being an editor helps in that you can distance yourself from the work a little, right? Because ideally you shouldn't edit your own work because you're not the most critical person to do so. It should be done by someone else and a second pair of eyes. But because one has worked professionally as an editor, so what I would do is I would write my creative stuff, put it away for a while, come back and then look at it critically as an editor. So then that provides the distance so that you can look at it again and then take it forward. So how this dynamic relation between being a children's writer and a writer for adults works is, I think it really depends on what one is feeling at that time. So the poetry part is driven more by the heart. And while being an editor and a translator, because my mother tongue is Malayalam, and I've also translated short stories from Malayalam to English, one of which was published in Ma'am's edited journal, Indian Literature, last year. It was the first short story written in the Malayalam language in 1891, and my mother and I had translated it together. So that's a more consciously driven literary activity. I found the story, I found it hadn't been translated, or I couldn't find one that really worked for me. So then we worked on a brand new translation that's been appreciated. So that's more driven by the mind. Right? So I think the balance one has to find here is between the heart and the mind, and sometimes one predominates and sometimes the other. But when both work together, that's when magic happens.
Right.
Thank you. Actually, I was so engrossed. I was looking for more words coming out of you, so I was lost for a second. But thank you, ma'am, for brilliantly answering the book. And yes, we'll come with more questions to you, ma'am. I'll move to the next question. As you were mentioning, ma'am, the transnational journey and narrative of Atreya, ma'am, and transsectional as well, I would say, from engineering to this, and then using these tools for your narratives as well. Ma'am, I want to know that all your brilliant stories speak for narrative from roots of India, explore female characters who are looking for something substantial, more than just their living with their respective circumstances. Following this chain of thought, we would like to ask your opinions on women-centric narratives in India, particularly, where does the current flow is, flowing for narratives which are vocalizing female narratives by female authors in India and outside as well. And in terms of themes, subjects, style, and modes as well, where do you see this is flowing?
Thank you for that generous framing. I think the most exciting thing about women centric narratives in India today is that they're finally expanding beyond the trauma plot. While stories of suffering and survival are still important, we are now seeing more nuance, stories of ambition, quiet resistance, intergenerational tension, and even joy. What's powerful is the range from regional voices rooted in local dialects to urban voices confronting patriarchy in corporate boardrooms. In terms of how these stories are being told, I see a refreshing boldness. Writers are letting go of conventional structures and embracing what best serves the story, whether that means non-linear timelines, intimate first-person accounts, or hybrid formats that blur memoir and fiction. There's also room now for silence, for ambiguity, for emotional restraint, things that were considered, too unsubtle or unmarketable. And as for modes, definitely more digital. Women are self publishing, serializing stories online, running Kickstarter campaigns, and experimenting with formats like audiobooks. Like I mentioned, I'm currently working on narrating mine using a voice clone trained on my own speech. There's a real hunger for authenticity, not polish. The more unapologetically rooted the story is, the more universally it seems to resonate.
True.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a really deep answer, I should say. So I would move now to the next. Thank you for answering that question, ma'am. I would move to my next question to Sukrita, ma'am. Ma'am, sorry, your published once again, ma'am, I lost my file. Your published, widely read poetic works, especially, ma'am, explore major themes of present human existence and writing from many decades now, with utmost regard to your work, ma'am. And we want to ask that what changed your craft, especially adapted with changing times in sense of reception and demand among the readers. Have you been looking towards unconventional methods for your creative and critical works? For example, your influential work on partition, because I was looking into it, a subject which is gaining much interest of archival studies under digital humanities these days. So please share your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I am basically, I wouldn't say that, I have been always having an eye on what the demand is from the market or from the readership or whatever. With the evolving time, I think it is something else that has brought those transformative moments, at times. Probably, as all of us think, I believe that all the things that one has been doing, there is a lot of overlap also. Like, for instance, for nearly 30 years or more, 40 nearly, I was a teacher. I was teaching in the university, in the colleges, and so on. So I think while I was teaching, I hit upon, at a very early stage, a book called Waiting for Godot, which is Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. And I was taken up with the ambiguity on the one hand, and on the other hand, a certain kind of a bareness, kind of naked truth, as it were, hitting one, and drawing attention to a certain kind of a minimalist approach, to expression. How do you say whatever you think you want to say in as few a number of words as possible? So that became a kind of an obsession with me, that I should use very few words in my poetry. And therefore, my absolutely latest book that has come out is called Yellow, a book of poemlets. And I choose to call them not poems, but poemlets, because they are small, very, very small. And they are dangerously small because they can be kind of dismissed as non poetry, as it were. But what I try and do is to to build on the silences that can become very rich with the very evocative words before and after that silence. You know what I mean? Like you say something in one small line of maybe 4 words, 3 words, or whatever, then the next line would come after a very deep silence, and the second line would add to that silence. So what matters is how these words evoke silence. What kind of silence? Pregnant with a certain kind of a story in itself, a story that is told without words, and yet there are words around it, you know. So I mean, I've been trying to do that, and so, you know, the editing that I do, as I think it was Priyamvada who mentioned the whole faculty of editing. A lot of it happens in the mind when you're writing a poem, but also a lot of it happens on paper when you look at it the second time, the third time, and inevitably I notice that I'm striking off words rather than adding words to the poem. So that's one kind of approach that I've had for some time now. And therefore, the need for me to bring out this book, which is called Poemlets, you know, it is yellow and it's poemlets. And these poemlets are very, very small. You talked about my interest in partition and my partition book. Well, my father, who was also a writer, by the way, Urdu, he wrote in Urdu, and a very well known writer. He was a refugee from Sialkot. And because he was a refugee from Sialkot, and perforce for some reason he had to he got married with the condition, I mean, he got married to my mother, and the condition was that he would have to go to Nairobi with her because they were from Nairobi. And so he said, I'm a refugee. I don't care where I'm taken. I don't mind going to Kenya then. And that's why I was born in Kenya then, right? Now, because he was a refugee himself, that sensibility with him was that he was forever a refugee. And he was writing on his partition experiences, but not narrating to us physically. That has often happened with most writers. Anyway, but through that process, what happened was that partition which he suffered got passed on to the next generation, which was me, typical midnight's children that we were. And at that time, all that he had to say for the 15 years of my life there, all the time I heard, when we go back home. And so I always had a quarrel with him. I said, my God, you denied us the idea that Kenya was our home. Mm-hmm. And so when we came here, we were kind of homeless even here. Because here it was very difficult to settle down in the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I think I became a poet because I was trying to identify myself, as to what am I and who am I in the context of being an Indian and what kind of an Indian. Yes, my brown skin was there, but I was not fitting in terms of everything, culture, language, thought process. And somewhere I think my work on partition happened only with the desire that I wanted to understand what happened at that time. Why partition? Why did my father have to go to Kenya? Why did he feel homeless all his life? And his writing projects that also all the time. He did the original writing in terms of narratives and stories. His novel Sleepwalkers is very well known. So all that he was doing in creative work, I then took it up in terms of critically understand partition literature. And that is why my book came out, Narrating Partition, which is being used in Delhi University and some other universities.
No, thank you, ma'am, for answering this question. And we all connect with the sentiments that you shared with us. So speaking of nuances, I would again go to Miss Atreya, ma'am. It was because an author persona, uh, a role of medium of expression, for example any language or the medium that you're using, paper or digital, it transform an author persona as well, or if it does, of course I will ask you about that. How does and your experiments with digital new technologies, your affairs with new technology, how does this alter you as an author persona and as a person who's writing for their readers, and how would they take it? What goes into your mind when you're writing on print, for print literature or digital platforms? With that, I would add my last question to you, ma'am. Your stories visualize rural India, breathe traditions and seek new life, almost like an established trope of tradition versus modern, but it is not this simple. Again, nuances of different social settings add richness to discourse. Same goes for a creator who is not writing in a void. Again, as I said, there are various factors at play, like language, medium, regions, demography, social history, and culture. Adding to this is the rising, digital culture digitalization, just as you spoke in your initial speech. So, please tell how, as an author, you're dealing with this change in the movement, and what changes that it has inculcated in you as an author persona.
So this is such a rich question because yes, at first glance, my work does look like it's engaging the tradition versus modernity binary. But what I really try to explore is how the two exist. And I might not be answering your question directly, but please bear with me. So a character can bow to tradition and still wonder why widowhood comes with exile. That's not contradiction, it's complexity. Language, region, history, and class, these deeply shape how a character lives and loves. And as a writer, I'm always aware that I'm not working in a vacuum. I'm translating an emotional truth across layers of cultural context. Now add digitalization to the mix, and things get even more layered. The digital space allows for reach, but it also demands constant adaptation. I've gone from attending village storytelling festivals to uploading audiobooks narrated by AI in my own voice. Digital tools are how I build bridges between the old and the new. But the key, I think, is not letting the tools dictate the story. The story comes first, always. So I hope that answered the question.
Ma'am, on a brief note, whether that whenever one is writing, of course, our author can tell best. When they are writing, they pick up a theme or a story. With a theme in there, at least the back of the mind. Does it the theme or the story that you're trying to tell? Does it change when you're writing? For example, the audio, maybe some audio or video format, or for a print or short story. Does that theme alter, or you precisely decide ki this should be written for this medium or this should be written for this? Does it happen like that? I'm just curious.
So that you ask actually a very interesting question, and I've been thinking about this myself. So the first few books that I wrote, this was obviously not a consideration at all. But as I'm now looking to produce the audiobook myself, not with my narrator, I'm realizing that a lot of times you don't necessarily say he said, she said, or indicate things, and there are certain things that you need to clarify for your uh, like a listener versus a reader. Two more books in parallel, and I've certainly been conscious about that because with my older books, I don't know that I want to go back and modify them too much. It's definitely a different reading experience, a listening experience, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you for answering the extra question, ma'am. So, because I went curious with your answers, so I added another question. My last question, I know we're out of time almost. So, my last question will be to Priyamvada, ma'am. Ma'am, working as an editor for reputed publishing houses for these many years. Can you please draw a temporal map for us to understand cultural and functional changes that you have experienced over the last decade, where we see rapid growth of novel stylistic modes of production? And you yourself has been, experimenting with that, because I've been looking to your work and I could see that. And modes of production, technology, and perhaps a narrative shift, especially the narrative shift, the underlying part. Any technicalities that you have seen on that is on the rise? Please share your views.
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I think when I began, I said, some of us started out editing with pen on paper, but of course, like one final last draft or something. But pretty much everything else is, online or digital now. But having worked in print and online publishing for more than 25 years, I'd say that one has seen radical change from the days of hard copy editing. Now, people are unapologetic about AI-powered editing, for example, or writing, where you can just ask an AI to do many tasks for you, and then get an initial draft and then work on it thereafter. I think the biggest shift is the sheer number of people who want to be published and are able to find that opportunity now. Previously publishing was a much more challenging task. If you were a writer and you had a book and you wanted to find a publisher for it, it wasn't so easy to get published. The question now is whether everything that gets published is worth reading. But then that's something the market will determine. Right? But what it's certainly done is open the gates of opportunity to anyone who has So what I see in the number of people who want to be published and the opportunities the market offers for this, particularly if you're willing to pay for it. Even young children get their books published now. So you'll find there are publishers that offer a young child the opportunity to publish a book. They'll illustrate it, they'll package and format it, and you have a book out there when older authors are probably struggling to get published. The author's own efforts in promoting a book plays a very big part. And again, the digital spaces offer many ways of promoting your book now. So that's a whole new area that's opened up as well. So once you have your manuscript out there in the form of a book, you can promote and market it in numerous ways. Turn it into a video, make it a song, convert it into a podcast, have events at bookstores. Reaching out to an audience in multiple ways is something that wasn't possible earlier, which is very possible now. So I think we live in a very exciting time where people keep talking about the decline of reading, but people are reading more. It's just in different forms and ways. Right? Or certainly you might be listening to a book and not reading to it, but finally that book gets within you anyway. What will tomorrow bring? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. But I think each of us today has the opportunity to tell our story, and it's the technology that's making us happen. What we need to do is be true to our stories and seize the opportunities out there to tell them.
Right, ma'am. And this has reminded me, we are actually doing that. Tell me your story reviews. That we are certainly trying to bring that. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you for wonderfully answering that question. And with that, I guess we are at end of this session. And of course, again, with your permission, I would like to close this session with closing remarks, if you allow me. With that, we come. If anyone of you, ma'am, want to, have any last remark or anything, please.
Can I?
Yes. Please, ma'am. Yes, please.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just want to add this bit to what Priyamvada was saying, which of course is absolutely fascinating, that there are so many avenues now that technology has, given us in terms of reaching out to public at large. But there are a lot of dangers in that. And I think one needs to point that out, and the kind of self-advertisement that happens today is not necessarily a very happy stance, when it comes to the actual process of writing, and the loss of a certain kind of humility, for instance, or on the other hand, I think even the other business of, if it doesn't kind of appeal to the masses for some reason, whatever you have written with a lot of courage, then the kind of backlash that can come to you and dislodge you completely psychologically, which is also very, very dangerous. So how do you contain all that? Because technology is out there freely operating as a tool for all kinds of minds to put in, not necessarily creatively, but damagingly at times, So just with that warning, I think one has to retain that space for reflection, composure, humility, and writing is to become an offering, and the others who are receiving it, for the process of owning that reality before rejection or before complete laudatory action. So I think there has to be reflection, which has to be prioritized for creativity.
Very well put, ma'am. So again, it has come a full circle. The debate, how it started and how it is ended, with opportunities, and we started with challenges, and now we are looking up at the cautions as well, and emerging opportunities which can prove as golden for especially young writers or emerging writers who are trying to get published. And again, thank you so much, everyone. With that, we come to an end to tonight's discussion. And again, I thanks with us. I'm quite sure that our audience, the viewers who are watching this, as well had a similarly thought-provoking and much engaging session. We are grateful to you all for taking out time from your busy schedules and from being part of this discussion. And we hope that it will prove to be a significant stepping stone in our efforts to build a discourse and a discussion around this subject. So with that hope, it was an absolute pleasure and honor to have been in your company this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a last reminder to everyone that we are calling for submissions on working women in literature. The details can be viewed on Good Night. Thank you once again.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can